The biting wind howled across the plains, a cruel, indifferent force that seemed to mock the festive spirit of Christmas Eve. Silas Sil McCoy, his breath pluming like smoke, rode his horse Juniper back towards his solitary ranch. The journey from town had been a silent, grueling one, the only company the groan of his saddle leather and the rhythmic thud of Juniper's hooves against the frozen earth. He was a man built of equal parts solitude and stubbornness. His ranch, a collection of weathered timber and fences, was his whole world. He had carved it out of the dusty heart of Texas, and its isolation was both a choice and a consequence of a past he refused to acknowledge. His face, etched with lines from the sun and worry, was a map of a life lived alone. A flicker of color on the side of the trail caught his eye, an anomaly in the bleak landscape. He reined Juniper in, the horse snorting steam into the cold air. There, huddled beneath a thorny mesquite bush, were two small shapes. As he dismounted, the cold seeped into his boots, but a different kind of chill ran down his spine. They were children, two little girls, no older than 4 or 5, their small bodies wrapped in tattered wool blankets. "Hello?" he called out, his voice rough and unused. They didn't stir. He knelt, his calloused hands trembling slightly as he reached out. One of the girls, her face pale and streaked with dirt, opened her eyes. They were a startling, vibrant green, pools of fear in the twilight. She clutched a worn, headless rag doll to her chest. Her sister lay motionless beside her, her small hand gripping the other's sleeve. Sil felt an unfamiliar jolt, a punch to the gut that was more painful than any he'd ever taken in a brawl. Who would abandon children here on a night like this? The question twisted his stomach into a knot. He couldn't just leave them. The cold would finish what the heartless act had started. He gently scooped up the first girl, her weight surprisingly light. "It's all right, little one," he murmured, his voice softer than he'd intended. "I'll take you somewhere warm." The girl's eyes never left his, a silent plea for safety. He carried her to Juniper, carefully wrapping her in his own thick woolen coat. He then returned for the second girl, who was now stirring. She whimpered, her tiny hand reaching out for her sister. Sil's heart ached. He placed her on the saddle in front of him, holding her steady with one arm, the first girl cradled securely in his other. He spurred Juniper on, the urgency of the situation overriding the exhaustion in his bones. The ride back to the ranch was a desperate race against the falling temperature. He kept talking to them, his words a clumsy, low murmur, a promise of warmth and safety. He didn't know their names, their story, or what he was going to do. All he knew was that 2 small lives now depended on him, a man who had sworn off all dependence. When they finally arrived, the ranch house was a beacon in the darkness. He dismounted, carrying both girls inside, their small bodies limp from the cold. He laid them on the rug in front of the crackling fireplace. The warmth of the fire slowly began to coax the color back into their cheeks. Sil rummaged through his larder, his mind racing. He had dried meat, biscuits, and coffee, but nothing suitable for children. He settled for heating up some water and mixing it with a little sugar, creating a weak, sweet liquid. The girls drank it greedily, their small hands wrapped around the tin cups. One of them, the one with the green eyes, finally spoke. Her voice was a whisper, thin as ice. "Where are we?" "My home," Sil answered, his voice gentler now. "You're safe here." "I'm Rose," she said, her eyes flickering towards her sister. "And this is Lily." Lily, her eyes a deeper shade of brown, offered a small, shy smile. Their names, Rose and Lily, sounded so delicate, so fragile, a stark contrast to the harsh reality of their situation. Sil spent the night sitting vigil by the fire, watching them sleep. Their small, fragile presence filled the silent house with an unfamiliar warmth, a flicker of light in the darkness of his solitary life. He had rescued them, but the truth was they had rescued him from something he didn't even know he was lost in. The morning sun, though pale, brought a sense of cautious hope. Rose and Lily awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of sizzling bacon. Syl, feeling awkward and out of his element, had somehow managed to prepare a passable breakfast. He watched as they ate, their small hands gripping the forks with a careful precision. "We have to go back to town, girls," Syl said, his voice hesitant. "We need to find out who you belong to." Their faces fell, the small smiles fading. "We don't belong to anyone," Rose said, her voice small. "Mama told us to wait here. She said she'd come back." The words hit Syl like a physical blow. He felt a wave of anger and sorrow. Who could do such a thing? He couldn't shake the image of them, alone and freezing, waiting for a mother who never came. "We need to tell the sheriff," he insisted. "He can help us." Lily's lower lip began to tremble. "Don't take us away. We like it here." Syl's resolve wavered. He looked at their small, hopeful faces, and a promise he didn't even know he was making formed in his heart. "All right," he said, the words surprising even himself. "We'll wait, but we need to go into town for supplies." The girls' faces lit up. "Can we ride a horse?" Rose asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "You can ride in the wagon," Syl said, a slight smile on his lips. "It's safer." The wagon ride to town was a stark contrast to his usual solo trips. The girls chattered excitedly, pointing out jackrabbits and wild horses. The town of Redemption was a small, dusty outpost, a collection of saloons, a general store, and a blacksmith. The town's name was a cruel irony, for it offered little of the sort. As they rode down the main street, the town's inhabitants stared. A man with a reputation for being a recluse, a loner, with 2 small children. The whispers followed them like a trail of dust. Syl ignored them. He tied the wagon up in front of the general store and helped the girls out. He felt a newfound protectiveness, an instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Inside, the general store was a hive of activity. Syl was greeted by the owner, a wizened old man named Jedediah. "Silas McCoy," Jedediah said, his eyes twinkling. "What brings you to town with 2 little angels in tow?" Syl, feeling a blush creep up his neck, explained the situation. Jedediah listened, his expression growing somber. "A cruel world we live in, Silas. A cruel world." He looked at the girls, his gaze kind. "They're lucky they found you." Syl wasn't so sure. He felt a heavy burden on his shoulders, a weight that was both terrifying and strangely fulfilling. As he was paying for supplies, a tall, imposing man in a black coat strode into the store. His face was hard, his eyes cold and calculating. His name was Elias Thorne, and he was a powerful land baron, known for his ruthless tactics and his even more ruthless ambition. Thorne's eyes swept over Syl and the girls, a flicker of interest in his cold gaze. He bought a bag of flour, his movements deliberate and unhurried. As he left, he paused, his gaze fixed on Rose and Lily. The girls, sensing his presence, huddled closer to Syl. The encounter left Syl with an uneasy feeling. He had no reason to be suspicious, yet his gut told him to be cautious. He finished his shopping, his mind racing. He had to keep them safe. That was his one and only mission. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month. Syl's life was irrevocably changed. The silence of his ranch was replaced with the sounds of laughter and the chatter of 2 little girls. He found himself telling them stories, showing them how to ride a horse, and teaching them to care for the livestock. He was learning how to be a father, a role he never imagined he'd have. One afternoon, as they were gathering eggs from the chicken coop, Rose clutched his hand. "Papa," she said, the word a small, whispered melody. Syl froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. The word was a heavy stone, filled with a grief he had pushed down for years. He had had a daughter once, a long time ago. He had lost her and her mother in a fever. He had buried his grief along with his hope, building a wall of solitude around his heart. The word "Papa" brought that wall crumbling down. "Don't call me that, Rose," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her green eyes. Lily, seeing her sister's distress, began to cry too. Syl felt a pang of guilt. He knelt down, his hand stroking Rose's hair. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's just, "A long time ago I had a little girl, and I lost her." The girls looked at him with an understanding beyond their years. "We're here now," Lily said, her small hand reaching out and patting his cheek. Their simple act of comfort was more effective than any words. He knew he had to let go of the ghost of his past. Rose and Lily were his present, and he would be damned if he let them become a part of his past. He made the decision to go to the sheriff and tell him the whole story, to try and find their family, even if it meant losing them. He knew it was the right thing to do. It was what a good father would do. Sheriff Brody was a tired man with a kind face. He listened to Syl's story, his brow furrowed in thought. "Silas," he said, "I'll do what I can. I'll send out notices to the surrounding towns. But to be honest, if someone wanted to abandon them, they're not going to come looking. And if they did, who's to say they'd be safe?" The sheriff's words resonated with Syl. The thought of the girls being returned to the person who had left them was a cold one. He went to the town's telegraph office and sent a wire to his friend in another town, a man named Jesse, a former U.S. Marshal, asking him to use his contacts to help him find out about the girls. As he was leaving, he saw Elias Thorne. The man was speaking to a burly-looking cowboy, his voice low and menacing. They looked at Syl as he passed, their eyes sharp and calculating. The unease from the first meeting returned, stronger this time. The next few weeks were a blur of normalcy and quiet tension. The girls were flourishing. They were learning to read and write, and their laughter was a constant, joyous sound on the ranch. Syl was happier than he had been in years, and the loneliness that had been his constant companion was now a distant memory. Then the first shoe dropped. Syl was mending a fence when a rider appeared on the horizon. He was a gruff man with a cold stare. "You the rancher with the 2 girls?" he asked, his voice a low growl. "That's me," Syl said, his hand resting on the holster of his pistol. "Word is, you've got something that belongs to Mr. Elias Thorne," the man said, a sneer on his face. Syl's heart sank. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Don't play dumb. The girls. Mr. Thorne wants them back. They're his nieces." "Niece? What?" Syl's mind reeled. "His nieces? Why would he abandon them on the side of the road?" "That's none of your concern," the man said, his hand moving towards his gun. "Just hand them over and no one gets hurt." Syl pulled his pistol out, his movements fluid and quick. "You're going to have to try harder than that, mister. They're not going anywhere." The man, surprised by Syl's speed, hesitated. He saw the fire in Syl's eyes, the unyielding resolve. "This ain't over, rancher," he spat. "Thorne's not a man to be trifled with." He turned his horse and rode away. Syl stood there for a long time, his heart thudding in his chest. He felt a deep, profound fear, a different kind of fear from the solitude he had grown used to. This was the fear of losing something precious, a fear he had sworn he would never feel again. He knew he was in over his head, but he would not, could not, let them have the girls. He went inside the house, his hand still on his gun. Rose and Lily were playing with their rag dolls, oblivious to the threat that had just ridden away. He knew he couldn't keep this from them forever, but for now he would protect them, no matter the cost. The next day, Syl rode into town. He knew he needed help, and the only person he could think of was Clara, the owner of the town's most respectable saloon, the Golden Garter. Clara was a woman who had seen it all. She was sharp as a tack and had a quiet iron will that commanded respect. She was also a friend, a person who had looked past his gruff exterior and seen the man beneath. He found her polishing a glass at the bar. She looked up as he entered, her dark eyes sharp. "Silas," she said, her voice smooth, "you look like you've seen a ghost, and not the friendly kind." He told her everything, the girls, Thorne's claim, the threat. She listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she set the glass down and looked him in the eye. "Elias Thorne," she said, her voice a low murmur. "I knew it. He's been asking around town, looking for children matching their description. He's been trying to get his hands on the inheritance of a wealthy family he's a distant relative of. The man's a viper. The family was killed in a stagecoach accident months ago. The only survivors were the girls. Their mother, Thorne's sister, was a good woman. She probably left them there to protect them, to keep them out of his hands. Syl felt a sense of both dread and relief. So Thorne was telling the truth, in a way. They were his nieces. But the reasons behind his actions were sinister. "What do I do, Clara?" he asked, a rare note of desperation in his voice. Clara leaned over the bar, her voice low. "You can't fight him alone, Silas. He's got money, power, and men who will do his dirty work, but you're not alone. I have friends, people who owe me favors. We can help you. We can make sure those girls are safe." Syl felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had always been a loner, but for the first time he realized he didn't have to be. "I have a plan," Clara said, a glint of steel in her eyes. "We'll set a trap. We'll make it seem like you're cornered, and then we'll show him that you're not." The plan was set in motion. Syl rode back to his ranch, the sun setting behind him in a blaze of orange and purple. He felt a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer just a rancher, he was a protector. The next morning, 2 of Thorne's men showed up. They were different from the first one, more professional, more dangerous. "Mr. Thorne wants to speak with you," one of them said, his hand hovering over his gun. "He can ride out here himself," Syl said, his voice calm. The men laughed. "He's not a man who comes to you. You come to him." "Then I guess he's not speaking to me," Syl said, his hand moving slowly towards his pistol. The men, sensing his resolve, retreated. They had a job to do. They had to make it seem like Thorne was trying to negotiate. But their real mission was to scout the ranch, to find a weakness, a way in. They didn't know that Syl and Clara were waiting for them. Syl's friend, Jesse, arrived the next day. He was a tall, stoic man with a keen eye. He had been a U.S. Marshal for years and had a deep understanding of the law and of men like Thorne. "I checked on Thorne's story," he said. "It's all a fabrication. The girl's family had a will, a very specific will. It stated that the girls were to be entrusted to a distant relative, a cousin, a good man who lives in the East. Thorne, being a more distant relative, was left nothing. He's trying to get his hands on the girls because of the inheritance. He'll do anything to get it. He'll kill for it." Syl's blood ran cold. He had suspected it, but to hear it confirmed was a new kind of horror. He had to act. The trap was set. Syl sent a message to Thorne, agreeing to meet him in a secluded canyon a few miles from the ranch. It was a place Thorne would assume was a surrender, but in reality it was a place where Syl and his allies could have the upper hand. He told Rose and Lily that he was going into town for supplies. They were still too young to understand the gravity of the situation. He hugged them tightly, a silent promise to return. He rode to the canyon, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. Thorne was waiting for him, flanked by his men. Thorne's face was a mask of cold satisfaction. "Silas," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "I'm glad you came to your senses. The girls belong with me." "They don't belong to you, Thorne," Syl said, his voice steady. "They belong to me. I'm their family." Thorne laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You're a fool, McCoy. You think you can stand up to me? I'll make you an offer. You hand them over and I'll give you a good amount of money, enough to make you a rich man." "I don't want your money," Syl said, his hand moving slowly to his holster. "I want you to leave. Now." Thorne's men began to close in, their hands on their guns. Just as the tension was about to snap, a shot rang out from the canyon walls. One of Thorne's men fell to the ground, a look of surprise on his face. Jesse, his rifle held steady, stepped out from behind a rock. "The sheriff's on his way, Thorne," he said, his voice echoing in the canyon. "So are some of my old friends from the marshal's office. You're surrounded." Thorne's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of fear. He looked around, his eyes darting from Jesse to the other men who were now emerging from the shadows. The odds were no longer in his favor. "This isn't over, McCoy," Thorne snarled. He turned, his men following him, and rode away in a cloud of dust. The sheriff, a man of few words, arrived shortly after. He looked at Thorne's retreating forms, and then at Syl, a look of weary respect on his face. "You did good, Syl," he said. "I've been looking for a reason to put that man behind bars for years." Syl, his heart still thrumming with adrenaline, rode back to the ranch. He was exhausted, but a sense of peace, a feeling of rightness, washed over him. He had faced his demons, and he had won. He had protected the two people who had changed his life. The next day, Thorne was arrested. Jesse's information, combined with the girl's testimony and the evidence of Thorne's lies, was enough to put him away for a long time. The town of Redemption, for the first time, felt a little more deserving of its name. The girls, unaware of the full extent of the danger they had been in, were just happy to have Syl back. They clung to him, their small hands holding on tightly, a silent reassurance that he was their anchor, their home. With Thorne gone, a new chapter began for Syl and the girls. The ghost of his past had finally faded, replaced by the living, breathing reality of his new family. He no longer felt the need to be alone. He had a purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. He built a schoolhouse on his ranch, and a young teacher from the east came to teach the girls and the children of the neighboring ranches. He hired more hands to help him with the ranch, and his solitary existence became a bustling, happy one. He was no longer just Silas McCoy, the solitary rancher. He was Papa, a man who had found his redemption in the most unexpected of places. He had found it in the green eyes of a little girl, in the silent strength of her sister, and in the love that had grown between them. Years passed. The twin girls, Rose and Lily, grew into strong, independent young women. They were beautiful, not just in their faces, but in their hearts. They had a kindness and a resilience that had been forged in the fires of their past, a past they now only remembered in fleeting memories, replaced by the comfort and security of their life with Syl. Syl, now an older man, sat on his porch watching the sunset. Rose and Lily, now women, were laughing as they talked. He felt a deep, profound sense of peace. He had found his purpose. He had found his family. He had found his redemption. He looked at the path that led to his ranch, the path he had traveled for so many years alone. Now it was a path of laughter, of love, of a future he had never dared to dream of. The path, once unseen, was now as clear as the blue Texas sky. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he had finally found his way home.